If you like this story, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next exciting stories. And now let's enjoy the story. The sun hung low over the rolling hills of Blue Ridge, casting long shadows across the precinct parking lot. Richard Nelson, dressed in a faded plaid shirt, worn jeans, and scuffed sneakers, stepped out of his car and surveyed the building before him. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary police station, but Richard knew better. Behind those glass doors lay a toxic culture that had gone unchecked for years. Today, he planned to see it for himself. Richard adjusted the brim of his baseball cap and walked toward the side entrance. The whispers of misconduct and abuse of power that had plagued this precinct were what had brought him here. Newly appointed as chief, Richard had no intention of starting his tenure with polite meetings and handshakes. He wanted to see the truth, unfiltered. Inside, the hum of ringing phones and the clatter of boots filled the air. Officers huddled near desks, some laughing, others engrossed in paperwork. Richard walked past unnoticed, his unassuming appearance drawing little attention. It was exactly as he wanted, but the moment of calm didn't last long. "Hey, you!" a voice barked, sharp and condescending. Richard turned to see a tall, white officer striding toward him. His badge read Daniels, and his smirk radiated arrogance. Behind him, a small group of officers leaned against the wall, watching the interaction with amusement. "You lost or something?" Daniels asked, his tone laced with mockery. "This isn't the welfare office." Richard stayed silent, his eyes meeting Daniels' gaze. The officer stepped closer, his smirk widening as he sized up the man before him. "You deaf? I said you don't belong here. Get out before I call someone to drag you out." The laughter from Daniels' audience grew louder. Richard's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. "Is this how you greet everyone who walks through these doors?" Richard asked, his voice calm but firm. Daniels' smirk faltered for a moment before he leaned in, his face inches away from Richard's. "Only the ones who don't matter." Then, without warning, Daniels spat in Richard's face. Time seemed to freeze as the room erupted in laughter. Daniels stepped back, his smug grin plastered across his face, while the other officers chuckled and whispered among themselves. Richard's face remained stoic as he wiped the saliva away with a handkerchief from his pocket. "Not a word, huh?" Daniels sneered. "Figures." Richard looked around the room, his gaze steady and unyielding. Without another word, he turned and walked down the hallway, the officers' laughter trailing behind him. He headed toward the briefing room, where his first official meeting as chief was scheduled to take place. Inside the room buzzed with chatter as officers filed in. Captain Harris stood at the podium, preparing to introduce the new chief. Daniels entered moments later, his confidence unshaken, and leaned casually against the wall. He had no idea what was about to happen. "All right, settle down," Harris called out, clapping his hands to get the room's attention. "We've got an important introduction today." The room quieted, curiosity sparking among the officers. Harris cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to introduce our new chief of police, Richard Nelson." The room froze as Richard stepped forward, his calm demeanor contrasting sharply with the tension that filled the air. Daniels' smirk evaporated as recognition dawned. His face turned a deep shade of red, his bravado replaced by a growing sense of dread. "Good morning," Richard began, his voice steady. "As of today, I am your new chief of police." The silence was deafening. Richard's eyes swept the room, landing briefly on Daniels before moving on. "This morning I entered this building in plain clothes," Richard continued. "I wanted to see how this department operates when no one's watching. And what I saw was unacceptable." A murmur rippled through the room, but Richard raised a hand to silence it. "I witnessed behavior that not only disrespects the badge, but disrespects the community we serve. Let me be clear. The culture that allows this kind of behavior ends today." Richard stepped away from the podium, his eyes locking on Daniels. The room held its breath as he walked slowly toward the officer. "Officer Daniels," Richard said, his tone sharp, "you represent everything that is broken in this department." Daniels shifted uncomfortably, his confidence from earlier completely shattered. "Chief, I didn't know." "That's exactly the problem," Richard interrupted. "You didn't care to know. You didn't take a moment to think before you acted because you assumed the man standing in front of you didn't matter." Daniels opened his mouth to respond, but Richard's glare stopped him cold. "When you spat in my face, you didn't just disrespect me. You disrespected every officer who wears this badge with honor. You disrespected the oath you swore to uphold. And you disrespected the community that trusts us to protect them. The room was deathly quiet. Richard turned to address the rest of the officers. What I witnessed today wasn't just one man's mistake. It was a culture. A culture where bullying and prejudice are tolerated, celebrated even. That stops now. He returned to the podium, his tone growing firmer. Effective immediately, Officer Daniels is suspended pending an internal investigation. And let me be clear, this is not about punishment. This is about setting a standard. Gasps rippled through the room as Daniels's face turned crimson. The other officers exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier laughter replaced by a heavy sense of accountability. Richard's first day as chief sent shockwaves through the department. Officers who had once felt untouchable now found themselves walking on eggshells. Whispered conversations about Daniels's suspension spread like wildfire, and the atmosphere in the precinct shifted. Richard wasted no time initiating a full review of the department's practices. He uncovered a pattern of misconduct that had been swept under the rug for years. Complaints of excessive force, discriminatory behavior, and abuse of power painted a damning picture. Over the following weeks, Richard held mandatory training sessions on implicit bias, community engagement, and professional conduct. Some officers embraced the changes, eager to improve. Others resisted, clinging to the old ways. Richard's reforms didn't sit well with everyone. While a number of officers began reflecting on their behavior and adopting the new standards, others saw the changes as an attack on the old guard, their way of life that had thrived for decades. Among the resistance, Lieutenant Mark Reynolds, a senior officer with 15 years in the precinct, was the most vocal. Known for his gruff demeanor and unapologetic style, Reynolds viewed Richard as an outsider who didn't understand what it meant to be one of them. "You've got officers here who've been through hell on these streets, Chief," Reynolds said during a tense staff meeting. "And now you're telling us we're the problem? You don't clean up a ship by throwing the crew overboard." Richard listened patiently, his hands folded on the table. When Reynolds finished, he leaned forward, his tone calm but unyielding. "No, Lieutenant," Richard replied. "You clean up a ship by throwing overboard the rot that's weighing it down. And right now, this department is sinking because some of us forgot what it means to serve." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Reynolds gritted his teeth but said nothing more. It was clear the battle lines had been drawn. Despite the pushback, Richard found allies in unexpected places. Officer Maria Reyes, a rookie who had kept her head down since joining the force, approached Richard one afternoon. "Chief," she began nervously, "I need to tell you something." Richard gestured for her to sit, sensing the weight behind her words. Reyes revealed how she had witnessed Officer Daniels and others routinely mocking civilians and abusing their authority during patrols. "I stayed quiet because I was scared," she admitted, her voice shaking. "But after what you did, I want to do better." Richard placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Change starts with courage, Officer Reyes. Thank you for stepping forward." Reyes became one of Richard's key supporters, helping him identify areas where the department had failed and suggesting ways to rebuild trust with the community. Her bravery inspired other officers to come forward, slowly eroding the culture of silence that had protected bad behavior for so long. The community, however, wasn't as easily convinced. Years of mistreatment had left deep scars, and many residents viewed Richard's appointment with skepticism. At a town hall meeting, residents voiced their frustrations. A middle-aged woman stood, her voice trembling with anger. "My son was stopped last month for no reason," she said. "They pulled him out of the car, humiliated him in front of everyone, and then let him go like it was nothing. How do you fix that, Chief Nelson?" Richard nodded, her words hitting him like a blow. "I won't stand here and pretend I can erase the pain this department has caused," he said. "But I can promise you this. Those days are over. We will hold ourselves accountable, and we will earn back your trust, step by step." His honesty struck a chord with some, but others remained unconvinced. The road to rebuilding trust was long, and Richard knew it would take more than words to heal the divide. Daniels, meanwhile, wasn't going down quietly. Suspended and humiliated, he began spreading rumors about Richard, claiming the new chief was only there to settle a political score. He filed an appeal against his suspension, insisting he was the victim of an unfair system. The department's internal investigation into Daniels revealed a pattern of misconduct. Complaints ranged from verbal harassment to unnecessary use of force, all of which had been quietly dismissed by the previous leadership. Richard made the findings public, doubling down on his commitment to transparency. Daniels' appeal was swiftly denied, and he was officially terminated. The decision sent shockwaves through the precinct. For the first time in years, there were consequences for bad behavior, and everyone was watching. Not everyone welcomed the changes. One evening, as Richard prepared to leave the precinct, he found a note tucked under his windshield wiper. The message, scrawled in red ink, read, "Leave now or you won't make it out alive." Richard stared at the note, his jaw tightening. It wasn't the first time he had faced threats, but this one felt personal. He took a photo of the note and handed it to Captain Harris. "Double-check the cameras," Richard said. "Let's find out who's behind this." Harris nodded, his expression grim. "Be careful, Chief." The threat only strengthened Richard's resolve. He knew change wasn't easy, and it wasn't safe, but he wasn't about to back down. As the weeks turned into months, the precinct began to change. Officers who resisted the new culture either left voluntarily or were shown the door. New recruits, vetted for their integrity and dedication to public service, began to fill the ranks. One day during a routine patrol, Officer Reyes and her partner responded to a call about a young boy who had gone missing. They found him hours later, frightened but unharmed, and returned him to his family. The boy's mother wept as she thanked the officers, her words breaking through the years of mistrust. "Thank you," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I didn't think I'd ever feel safe calling the police again." Reyes recounted the story to Richard later, her eyes shining with pride. "It feels good to do it right, Chief." Richard smiled. "That's why we're here." By the end of his first year, Richard's efforts had transformed the precinct. Complaints of misconduct dropped significantly, and community engagement programs flourished. The town hall meetings, once filled with anger and frustration, now saw residents working alongside officers to address issues. Richard stood in the precinct one evening, watching as officers filed out after their shifts. The laughter and camaraderie felt genuine, not built on exclusion or cruelty, but on mutual respect. Captain Harris approached, a small smile on his face. "You've done good work here, Chief." "We've done good work," Richard corrected, "but there's always more to do." As he walked to his office, Richard paused to look at the plaque on the wall that bore the department's motto, "To protect and serve." He had always believed in those words, and now, for the first time in years, they felt like more than just a slogan. They were a promise he intended to keep. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please support me by clicking the logo in the bottom right corner to subscribe to my channel. This way, you won't miss any of the exciting stories coming up. Thank you so much.